Today I want to talk, as a philosopher, about the relationship between the Internet of Things and well-being. In particular, what I want to talk about is how I see philosophy as making a contribution to the conversation of how digital media in general, and in particular how an Internet of Things can serve the interests of well-being. Let me start out by clarifying a couple of concepts. In talking about well-being, I'll rely on Mark Bernstein's view that to have well-being is to have the capacity to be benefited or harmed. You can be made better off or worse off. In the Internet of Things, and this is a quote from a report from the European Commission, you have physical objects as nodes in a networked physical world, or you have the material and the virtual world as being then integrated. The Internet of Things holds an ambitious and captivating promise of enhancing well-being for a world population that's verging on 9 billion people. In this paper, I want to reflect on one philosophical dilemma involved in deliberately designing environments so as to enhance well-being. I mentioned two in the abstract, but I'm going to leave one out. First, let me say something about what I won't be doing in this paper. Many philosophers have had many things to say about well-being, as Ronnie has mentioned, including defining what it is. I don't want to suggest any novel definition of well-being or defend an old one, nor do I want to make any case for what goods are most worth pursuing in order to achieve well-being. I will also be leaving debates about whether happiness and well-being are the same thing off to the side, except for the debate regarding the subjective and the objective views about well-being, about which I won't be taking a stand. So I guess I'm done. Thank you very much. On to the next. No, okay. I'm going to make two passes at the question that I will be pursuing. The first is this. It's admittedly skeptical. I want to suggest that trying to design the Internet of Things so as to promote greater well-being runs into a fairly substantive philosophical, what was that word, bagalon? Fairly substantial philosophical bagalon, a real challenge and dilemma. I'll talk about it particularly in the context of designing smart environments. There's no way I want to suggest that philosophy can get around the dilemma, and so in this sense, the role that philosophy, as I see it, can play in this conversation, it's a negative one. I don't believe it's the end of the matter. That's where my second pass will come in. In that pass, again, speaking as a philosopher, I'll take a more positive view, and I'll offer some thoughts as to what design imperatives might mitigate this dilemma and so make the Internet of Things more hospitable to, more of an incubator for, you might think, human well-being. Okay, so here's for the first pass. Around the world, a number of conversations are taking place focused on developing proofs of concepts for smart cities. Here's one involving Nice. In 2013, assisted in part by the Cisco Corporation, Nice began to develop a proof of concept for a smarter city with well-being in mind, as the turquoise shows here. At the infrastructure level, the project, called Connected Boulevard, consists of about 200 Wi-Fi-enabled interconnected sensors and other devices along an 800-yard-long stretch of Boulevard Victor Hugo, which runs next to the Mediterranean. I'm from Minneapolis. I would just like to think that being by the Mediterranean, Nice, that would be enough of an uplift for well-being. Yeah. But this is going to also, they say, some technological additives here to increase well-being even more. Part of the project involves things in Nice that are also going on in other cities, make it easier to find a vacant parking space for the purposes of cutting down on traffic congestion. But it also is going to include a way for people who come to the boulevard to find whether they can find shade or a sunny spot, whatever would, again, subjectively suit them best for their quality of of life. So you can see on the slide here that there's sensors where the car is. There's sensors in that parking lot that will determine whether the space is an open space or not. There's cameras also. There's other sensors. I'm not sure of all the things that they do. I just wanted to contrast this with another model. That one is heavily infrastructured. It involves crowdsourcing to some degree, but the government is investing a lot in it. Here's a project, not in proof of concept, it's more beta, I guess you could say, noise tube. Noticing that noise pollution is an impact on human well-being. Here the idea is that from your cell phone, you can download an app onto your cell phone that would then allow the microphone on your cell phone to transmit a certain noise level to the cloud, which would then be aggregated, your GPS taken into account, and then reflected in a map that you can also then download. So it's like real-time information. Download to see what part of a town is the noisiest part of town. So here you have, it's a fuzzy image for what part of Paris looks like in terms of its noise. We can see that there are a number of ethical issues, I think, raised by these illustrations, including the question of, say, who owns the data for whether somebody prefers sunshine or shade, for how long the data kept, how private the data would be. But my interest here is what philosophical assumptions are being made here about well-being in the design. Okay. The theory of well-being underscoring these particular illustrations looks to be one of the subjective theories. Hedonic, desire, satisfaction. But there are, I think, some difficulties with using at least those two particular subjective-oriented theories as a frame to approach well-being in the context of smart cities, smart spaces. I'll mention four very quickly. First two are general objections to the notion, I guess you could say, of subjective well-being in general. In maintaining that a felt feeling or experience of satisfaction is what matters when it comes to well-being, desire satisfaction theory seems to turn well-being into a matter with little connection, as Julia Anas has pointed out, to the intuitions we have that well-being is something we think of as pertaining to our lives as a whole over time, or as connected to eudaimonia, which would involve achievement and striving. A second difficulty, and Ronnie alluded to this, I think, a little bit, as the philosopher Daniel Hebron pointed out in his book, The Pursuit of Unhappiness. It's a point made by a lot of people. The only available way we have of knowing whether someone's experiencing well-being, subjective well-being, is in the self-report of the experiencing subject, and that's pretty unreliable. In self-reporting on well-being, we, and by we, I kind of mean here Americans in particular, tend to inflate how happy we actually are, even if we're not on the Mediterranean. These are here. So in the context of design, if you use untrustworthy reports for the purposes of assessing the impacts of smart environments, those environments might end up looking more hospitable or more conducive to well-being than they actually are. Okay. These might not be, though, the most important concerns about using desire satisfaction theory as a basis for thinking about well-being. The smartness of smart environments is limited to quantifiable inputs. So one could imagine a proof of concept for a boulevard in a northern city such as my own, here's Minneapolis, which is subject to ice and snow in the winter. You could have sensors embedded in the streets and sidewalks. They could send information on the slipperiness of conditions via an app to residents' iPhones and display the information in the form of a colored map. Most people prefer not slipping to slipping on an icy sidewalk. So you could see how satisfying that desire would contribute to somebody's well-being. What about desires or preferences, though, that are much more abstract in nature? They're less amenable to quantification. the desire to better yourself, the desire to be challenged, the desire to learn something more about yourself or other people or the world by taking a risk. What about the desire to help other people? The difficulty of designing a smart environment around the satisfaction of those desires would be substantial, but it could be argued that through the satisfaction of the desires such as those I just named, that's how you get the most well-being. That difficulty is maybe a practical one. The fourth and last issue, this is a little bit more philosophical. Okay, why take the desire satisfaction theory as a theoretical model for well-being rather than another approach? As we know, the theories tend to fall into two categories, subjective and objective. We can imagine taking, say, an objectivist theory of well-being, using it as the model to develop a smart environment oriented toward improving the quality of life. On the objectivist account of well-being, something can be said to be good for an individual, whether or not that individual recognizes it as good for him or herself. Whether they have a felt feeling or an experience of satisfaction from it. So it's not my interest to get here into the conundrum of whether it's possible to have a good account of well-being that's minus a subjective element, but I just want to say that, look, you could use the objective list as a viable alternative, because you can construct a list that would be comprised of concrete but non-quantifiable elements, such as having strong ties to family, friends, having religious or spiritual beliefs, or being able to exercise your autonomy. Here might be an advantage. We can envision constructing a smart environment whose smartness would be oriented around its environmental impacts. You could imagine a city that would have developed its transportation infrastructure so as to be supportive of driverless vehicles within a sharing economy. The vehicles could be operated as part of a form of public transportation designed to integrate with light rail, also in part as vehicles owned by private companies that would function to taxis similar to Uber, or as I've learned now, Get Taxi functions here in Israel. It could be protected that such usage would make a vast difference in mobility for the elderly. That's a good thing, disabled too. And over time dramatically cut down on the amount of city acreage devoted to parking. What could you do with that? You could free up that space devoted for parking in order to promote other values that a lot of people put on the objective list, such as the creation of parks filled with public sculptures. Here's one in Minneapolis. So as to promote the cultivation of aesthetic awareness and so add to well-being. All of that's objective list. My point here is a simple one. The goods that you might promote in the design of smart environments might vary depending on whether the theory of well-being undergirding the design is a subjective or an objective one. If that's the case, what kind of contributory role does this suggest would be most appropriate for philosophers to play when it comes to designing and weighing in on the Internet of Things? It's tempting to say that we could weigh in on what well-being is and to make a case for the reasonability of the subjective viewpoint or the objective viewpoint. But I'd like to propose, I realize this is a little provocational, to say that establishing a foothold in that debate might not be the most fruitful approach. The question as to whether well-being is best captured through a subjective, an objective, some hybrid of the two, I think that's an undecidable question. I think it's undecidable through philosophical argumentation. I think it's undecidable through empirical evidence. Both the views speak to something that matter deeply to the human condition. The importance that when we take stock of our lives as going for the better or for the worse, that each individual is the best judge of how well their own lives are going. The importance of the felt experience of satisfaction or happiness, and then also the importance of the idea that something that appears to hold value in general is something really that might matter for my own flourishing. So you have valuable things, I think, on both sides. And so, now where are we? Just now I used the phrase, take stock of our lives. We do this when we wonder whether the kind of life we're leading at the moment is the best kind of life to lead. Such wonder is rooted in the human spirit and the human enterprise. But that's not to say that it can't blossom or also be dampened by technological means. So rather than proposing that philosophers try in this context to unravel the meaning of well-being or settle debates over what goods might be incorporated into the Internet of Things as things to strive for, I want to suggest that the preservation and expansion of capacities and skills involved in taking stock of our lives be the focus of the philosophical contribution to how the conversation of how the Internet of Things can serve the interests of well-being. So that's a meta-level focus in character. The values that it would identify would be ones that are needed for the pursuit of well-being, but they're not necessarily goods toward which the pursuit of well-being is intended to aim. Okay. So now, in the time remaining, which is, 5 minutes, I just want to lay out two of these capacity building and preserving values or allowances. Let me know when I have like 1 more minute, okay? These relate to spontaneity and to then what I would call Pache Wittgenstein rough ground. So I just want to spell them out. Allowances for spontaneity. I'll take a driverless vehicle for an example here. If you're in a driverless vehicle, it might make some unexpected shift in the route that you expected to take due to an accident or traffic congestion, some other consideration unknown to the vehicle user, what we used to historically call the driver. In this way, the vehicle would appear to the user to be acting unpredictably and spontaneously. Same thing could go if your smart refrigerator starts ordering things that it thinks that you should eat based on the medical data that it's getting from some other part of your household. This idea relates to the larger picture where unpredictability is a systems characteristic of the Internet of Things itself. Unexpected decisions may result as emergent properties when data are shared, combined, and recombined in various ways across a variety of crisscrossing systems. So I want to argue, I won't have time to go into this here, but I have an argument here that you don't want to get into a situation where your devices are acting more spontaneously than you are, where they're being able to constrain your own responsibility. No matter how we may define well-being or the elements of which it's composed, we might want to acknowledge that the possibility of spontaneous, free, autonomous action is part of the infrastructure needed for the pursuit of well-being. Okay, rough ground. I borrow it from Wittgenstein, this expression. He used it to refer to the diversity of uses and the texture of everyday language as a way of mitigating the appeal of essentialism in philosophy. So I think it's important to attend to rough ground. Let me mention 3 ways in which the design of smart objects and spaces is presently unfolding. Most of current smart home design is intended to maximize convenience and efficiency through removing the rough ground of everyday life. The Samsung Smart Home, 2 minutes, good, almost done. The Samsung Smart Home, displayed at a trade show, to take one example, allows a user when away from home to turn appliances on and off by using a cell phone application. In some sense, we can say no big deal. It's just an extension for controlling a TV, like you would use a remote control. But in another sense, it allows the user to put the public social space in which she finds herself out of play in order to interact with the private space of her home. I have some other examples here that we could talk about in discussion. I will now leave them out. The personalization of information lies at the heart of what could be called seamless searches on social media, where the information one person receives as a result of a search query can differ from what someone else receives as a result of the same query due to the results being pre-screened according to what a particular website understands as your own interests and preferences. Okay, there's much that's been written by Cass Sunstein and others about that pre-filtering bubble effect and its importance to mitigate it to sustain democracies. So the point I'm making here runs parallel. The more personalized the smart environment is, the less friction it presents. My interactions with it become more efficient, but at the same time, the realm of the social becomes compressed. And I think it's within the realm of the social. We run up against other people. We run up against other ideas. It challenges who we are. It sparks our imagination. It instigates our creativity. It prompts us to go back to the phrase I used earlier, to take stock of our lives. Okay, so let me then just sum up. At a practical level, to sustain the values I've been mentioning, it may mean minimizing the usage of facial recognition technologies, geotagging, other data identifying mechanisms to support the design of smart environments as personalized ones. It could also mean being watchful about the extent to which smart environments limit opportunities for making unplanned and unanticipated decisions. The infrastructural values I'm focusing on will intend to keep smart environments social and sticky rather than individually tailored and smooth. These values might reasonably be said to lie in the shadows of well-being, the penumbra of well-being. And I think that's important. We all know about the paradox of hedonism. The more we aim at happiness itself directly, the less likely we are to attain it. So in thinking about how digital media can contribute to well-being, we need to keep in mind what could be called the paradox of technological well-being. The more we use technology to aim directly at well-being, the more we could undermine our own aims if we don't pay attention to these values that lie underneath, in the penumbra, in the shadows of well-being. Paying attention to these shadows is, I think, a good contribution for philosophy to make in the discussions that lie ahead of us. Thank you for your attention.